Greetings and welcome back to Room 303 and our chats with Emily as we are calling our readings through the poetry of Emily Dickinson. We are in the Johnson edition. We turned out a poem 797, By My Window Have I for Scenery. Now, Emily spends so much time in that famous bedroom of hers that of course we today can visit when we visit Amherst. And it will be here that she says, looking out her window, she is able to see a pine tree. Now, Emily's love of trees, I think, is ubiquitous. We should point out all kinds of celebrations of trees. In 59 of her poems, she will reference trees. We'll even look at the way she uses the word pine, and both as a tree and then as well in one moment later in her poetry, as to pine, as in to long for. And in that regards, we have as well, I think, a celebration here that we want to pay attention to in regards to Ruthie's tree, which sits right outside of room 303's window. And I wanted to dedicate, actually, this lecture to Ruth Dye, who planted our tree there. We call it Ruthie's tree long ago. Ruth no longer a janitor for us at our school, but still beloved by so many of our students. And I want to as well bring us back to our assumptions at the very beginning of our study when we are at learnstrong.net, down that left-hand side, Chats with Emily, our playlist. I'm hopeful that you worked through our set of introductory comments as well as the preceding 796 poems. We just finished with 796, Who Giants Know. Now, Emily's love of nature we've spoken about many times. The question of this poem is the same question, I think, of John Keats's Ode on a Grecian Urn. Can nature, like art, speak? And if it can speak, how does it speak? The other thing I want to point out here is that the other romantic poet that I think Emily is influenced by here is Shelley's To a Skylark. By the way, we've given a full lecture on it. But you'll remember in that poem the way that he brings together two things that often can't normally go together. To describe the sound of a bird, for example, well, the sound of the bird is the color of a rainbow. It's a beautiful juxtaposition. We're going to see a similar game being played here. By my window have I scenery, just a sea with a stem. If the bird and the farmer deem it a pine, the opinion will serve for them. It has no port nor line, but the jays that split their route to the sky, or a squirrel whose giddy peninsula may be easier reached this way. For inlands, the earth is the underside, and the upper side is the sun, and its commerce, if commerce it have, of spice, I infer from the odors born. Of its voice to affirm when the wind is within, can the dumb define the divine? The definition of melody is that definition is none. It suggests to our faith, they suggest to our sight. When the latter is put away, I shall meet with conviction I somewhere met that immortality. Was the pine at my window a fellow of the royal infinity? Apprehensions are God's introductions to be hallowed accordingly. You'll remember hallowed from 271. We'll see it again in 1059 and 620. Notice she'll begin with telling you that right outside of her window, notice window capitalized, which makes us think about all of the windows in her poems. I heard a fly buzz when I died. Of course, that fly next to the window of that room, supposedly. She says, I have certain scenery. Scenery also capitalized. So notice, Emily is doing something, I think, symbolic here. But she'll say about this pine tree that it's a sea with a stem, which immediately makes us go, wait, what? What's going on? Reminds us of that famous line from the book of Job, roots of the sea. If the bird and the farmer deem it a pine, we saw pine in 333, we saw pine in 602. By the way, when we get to 1425, it's quite brilliant. I think Emily's doing this on purpose, by the way. The inundation of the spring enlarges every soul. It sweeps the tenement away, but leaves the water hole, in which the soul at first estranged seeks faintly for its shore, but acclaimed pines no more for that peninsula. I find it interesting that she uses the word pines in 1425 as longing for, and she mentions peninsula, which will happen a few lines later in this poem. Notice, if the bird and the farmer deem it a pine, the opinion will serve for them. Christine Miller, in her classic treatment of this poem, will point out that the word opinion is key to this poem. Notice capitalized. In other words, most people see it as a tree, as a pine tree. I get it, she says. But I'm going to see it as a sea. It has no port, nor a line, but the jays that split the route to the sky, or a squirrel whose giddy peninsula, again it's fascinating to study 1425 and our use of peninsula, may be easier reached this way. For inlands, the earth is the underside, and the upper side is the sun, which is fascinating to think, as we've often said. Trees are a compelling symbol or representation because, by definition, there seems to be more of them under the ground of the tree, under the ground, than above the ground. It must be so, or Ruthie's tree would blow over with the first wind. In other words, like you, you are like trees in that you're only as strong as your roots, and your roots have to be deep. So she's playing that game. It's commerce. That's interesting that she would play the game of commerce. If commerce it have, in other words, you can always cut the pine tree down and use it for something, sell it for something of spice. I infer from the odors born. In other words, the tree at certain times of the year will smell, especially because of the sap or the smell as it's secreting. And then she'll say of its voice, trees have voices, to affirm when the wind is within, and then all of a sudden it hits us. Oh yes, of course. This takes us back to Shelley's Ode to the West Wind in part 5. We've given full lectures at learnstrong.net. When she's talking about the way the tree can become the lyre or the guitar, right, the musical instrument, when the wind blows through the pine. We're obviously familiar with this living out here in Wyoming, where we have so many of these on our hill, right? Of its voice to affirm, when the wind is within, can the dumb define the divine? It's an amazing rhetorical question. Can the dumb define the divine? Go back to our study of Keats's Ode on a Grecian Urn. When old age shall this generation waste. What is it that he says? Beauty is truth, truth, beauty. That's all you know on earth, all you need to know. Then I think channeling Keats and his urn, the definition of melody is, that definition is none. It's forever piping songs, forever new. By the way, when we get to 988, we're going to come back to this very set of lines. The definition of beauty is that definition is none. Of heaven easing analysis, since heaven and he are one. It is interesting that Emily will use this formulation twice. This is, to me, profound philosophic observations Emily is now making. But notice she slips it into a tribute poem to a tree. Notice the tree. It suggests to our faith. They suggest to our sight. Notice the tree speaks beyond just what we can see. When the latter is put away, I shall meet with conviction I somewhere met that immortality. By the way, notice the personal pronouns of this poem. Emily saying, this tree has taught me immortality. Was the pine at my window a fellow of the Royal Infinity? Of course, playing now here with the Royal Society formed in 1662. Apprehensions, maybe that's the key word of the poem, are God's introductions to be hallowed accordingly. And I think that's the point of this poem, is that there is a sense or an awe or reverence that Emily will argue one should feel standing next to a tree or under the tree, right? I think her point at 2a is that trees are great spokesmen for the divine. At 2b, I love the first person characteristics of the poem. It's a very personal poem for Emily. At 3a, well, obviously we think about Emerson's nature. Obviously we think about Thoreau's Walden. All of the great trees of literature. Genesis 3, the tree in the middle of the Garden of Eden, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And obviously we think of Milton and his tree. I want to go, though, to Emily's contemporary, Walt Whitman. We've given, before we gave this series, Chats with Emily, we had Talks with Walt, where we did all of the poems of the deathbed edition of Whitman's Leaves of Grass. Do you guys remember when we did Song of the Open Road, passage 7? Here is the efflux of the soul. The efflux of the soul comes from within through embowered gates, ever-provoking questions. These yearnings, why are they? These thoughts in the darkness, why are they? Why are there men and women that while they are nigh me, the sunlight expands my blood? Why when they leave me, do my penance of joy sink flat and lank? Why are there trees I never walk under, but large and melodious thoughts descend upon me? I think they hang there winter and summer on those trees and always drop fruit as I pass. What is it I exchange so suddenly with strangers? What with some driver as I ride on the seat by his side? What with some fisherman drawing his sign by the shore as I walk by and pause? What gives me to be free, to a woman's and a man's goodwill? What gives them to be free to mine? I think it's quite compelling to think that Emily Dickinson and Walt Whitman lived at the same time, never met each other. He didn't know anything about her and her poetic venture, and she only had one comment about Whitman's Leaves of Grass, and it was kind of derogatory from what she had been told about Leaves of Grass. And yet, they're dealing with so many powerful similar themes. Finally, in 3B, well, it kind of goes without saying, what is your favorite tree? For those of us of 303, obviously it's Ruthie's tree, and we'll forever be grateful to Ruth Dye and the planting of that tree. Thank you, Ruthie.